Please visit playrummy-online.com to play the latest and best version of the game. Guide to Rummy. Rummy is one of the most popular classic card games in the world. It's easy to learn and play once you get the hang of it. Players and decks. Rummy is played with 2 and 6 players. It is played with the standard 52 card deck and aces are low. Dealing. Players take turns dealing when playing a 2-player game. When playing with 3 or more players, whose turn it is to deal, rotates clockwise every round. The player who deals first is chosen at random, and how many cards dealt to each player depends on the total number of players. 2 players. 10 cards each. 3-4 players. 7 cards each. 5-6 players. 6 cards each. The dealer deals cards one by one, then begins the discard pile by placing the following card face up in the middle of the table. The dealer then places the rest of the deck face down next to it, forming the stock. Players then are permitted to look at their cards and sort them. Goal. The goal of Rummy is to get rid of all your cards first. Players can read their hand of cards in 3 ways. To meld, a player takes multiple cards from his hand and places them face up on the table. This is the quickest way to get rid of cards. Sets and runs are the 2 valid types of melds in Rummy. A set, book, or group is 3 or 4 same-ranking cards. A run or sequence is 3 plus consecutive cards of a matching suit. Consecutive cards of different suits don't constitute a valid sequence. To lay off, add cards in your hand to already existing melds. However, players may not rearrange any melds as they lay off. To discard, put one of your cards in your hand face up on the discard pile. Players signal the end of every turn by getting rid of a card in this way. Once a player has laid down all of his or her cards, the other player's cards are totaled up and added to the previous round's total. Then the player with the lowest score wins. Play. Players take turns rotating clockwise, starting with the person to the left of the dealer. In a 2-player game, players alternative turns. Each turn includes the following in this order. Drawing. Each player must start his or her turn by adding a card to his or her hand. Melding. After beginning his or her turn by drawing a card, a player may lay a valid set or run down if she or he has one. Laying off. After melding, players can add on to runs or sets already melded by any player. Discarding. To signal that the turn is over, a player must discard a card from his or her hand to the discard pile. The round immediately ends when a player gets rid of all cards in his hand or goes out. The player wins the round. Scoring. Once the round ends with a player going out, total up the other player's cards as follows: kings, queens, jacks, and tens. 10 points. Number cards. Face value. Aces, 1 point. The total value of the cards left in each losing player's hand is recorded and added to the previous round's total. The points are penalty points. When any player reaches a previously agreed upon target score of 100, the player with the lowest score wins. Strategy. Here are some tips and tricks for how to win Rummy. Get rid of face cards and other high-value cards. At least do so towards the end when you notice that your opponent is about to run out of cards. It's easier to make a run than it is to get 3 of a kind. So if you're forced to discard either a card that could later form a run or one that could be part of a set, it's better to discard one that could later form a set. Pay attention to what your opponent does. If he or she grabs a 10 of spades from the deck, you can bet that they probably either have a 10 already or are trying to complete a run of spades. Do your best to block them from getting rid of their cards. Keep in mind that a run can have more than 3 cards in a row. Sometimes the best way to get rid of cards fast is to form a 5 or 6 card run. Variations of Rummy. Be sure to discuss and decide upon any variations among fellow players before starting a game. Set number of rounds. Instead of playing to a target score, players can decide to play to a set number of rounds. The player with the least amount of points after the set number of hands is the winner. More than one meld. Some play that players are allowed to lay down any number of melds during each turn. Be sure that all players are on the same page about how many melds can be played during each turn before beginning a game. Many also give a player bonus points if he or she goes out in one turn or going rummy, doubling the hand score. Some don't allow a player to lay off cards until he or she has laid down a meld. This is also a very common variation. Aces high. A run of ace 2-3 would count, but a run of queen ace wouldn't. Some let aces count as either low or high. When this rule is implemented, aces count for 15 points rather than 1 point, since they are more useful, even though aces can't be both high and low at the same time, such as in a king ace 2 run. Jokers. Standard rummy doesn't use jokers. Some play that jokers can be used as wildcards that can replace any other card to form sets and sequences. When this rule is implemented, jokers are valued at 15 points and can be used by other players once they're on the table. Discard last. Some require players to discard a card even at the end of their last turn. Playing with this rule, a player wouldn't be permitted to meld or lay off all of his or her cards, since he or she couldn't finish by discarding one. Reusing discard pile. If each player hoards cards that the other players want, each player could draw from the pile and discard the card he or she just drew. To avoid that sort of repetition, players might consider limiting how many times they reshuffle the discard pile per round. Once the stockpile runs out, the game is over and all players call their remaining cards. Scoring. In a common variation of traditional rummy, only the winner scores points after each round. The winner then gets the total number of points from all the cards in the hands of the losing players. The game still ends once a player reaches the target score. The player who reaches it wins the game. Others play that the winner wins real cash from the losers according to how many points they each have in his or her hand. The game would end after an agreed upon number of rounds instead of once a certain score is reached. If you get bored here, we have plenty of other games to play. Go play the card game Hearts or the card game Spades or even the card game Solitaire. Please visit Playrummy-online.com to play the latest and best version of the game.